Your boy Big Nasty, Alfred Konuwa of Forbes of Pro Wrestling Bits. He's gonna do a video arguing that the blackness of current day NXT is why it's successful, and the whiteness of AEW and the whiteness of NXT in the past is why those things did not work. Now, this is obviously just I think it's like a minute and 30 seconds or whatever, not long clip. I know it's going to be a longer video, but Alfred Konuwa talks about race literally in every single video, But this is supposed to be in some kind of response to DEI, and there are things in here that I want to discuss. So I'm going to play the audio, and let's see what we got. Where is he? Let's play this thing.
Whenever I talk about black people in wrestling, people always assume that I want equality. No, equality is overrated. I'm for inequality in pro wrestling. In other words, I want to see more black people on TV than any other race. At the end of the day, pro wrestling is entertainment, and you can't be entertaining without being cool. And this isn't even really a youth thing. I've already said this before, and I'll say it again. The Big Black Hurt Syndicate is the coolest thing in all of AEW. We Heard People is a bop. Shouts to Westside Gun. And them niggas is in their 50s. Black culture has the major key to what's cool in this country.
All right. Let's pause right here. There's another couple of seconds left. Let's talk about what he said first. Now, the whole idea, he says he wants inequality. He wants to see more black people. I also want to see more black people. I don't know. When he says he wants to see more blacks than any other race, I'm not going to go that far. Because I really don't care about the race of wrestlers. But I will opine a bit on the cool factor. Because what he says about black people having sort of the license on what's cool, that's been the case for since the 60s, actually. So, I hate to break it to white people, but y'all really have not been cool since the 50s. I don't think anybody's idea of what's cool is white. Now, that doesn't mean that Stone Cold Steve Austin wasn't cool. Doesn't mean that John Cena wasn't cool. But what it means is there was a shift in the 90s. I mean, not in the 90s, in the 60s. A cultural shift, a great cultural shift after integration. It actually happened before, in the 50s, but there was still segregation and stuff like this. But in the 60s, after segregation was defeated, you started seeing a large upswell of white kids imitating blacks. So one of the number one things that you may have seen in the past, and you look at youth culture in the 60s, is you started seeing white people engaging in protest culture that they saw black people getting involved with. Now, I'm not saying that stuff was good or bad. I'm just saying that you started seeing a lot of white people, with the black power fist in the air. Some of them even had afros, but there was still a strong white culture where you had like Woodstock and all that kind of stuff. You still had your rock music. White people still had their own lane. They just dabbled in blackness. Sometimes they listened to the Temptations, and they loved some of the black rock bands or funk bands of the time. And in the 80s, it was the same thing. The 90s is when it actually started to shift, and you actually started seeing a lot more white children growing up to imitate rappers and ball players. And by the 2000s, I don't think white people was anywhere near cool anymore. And one of the things that I've said on this channel before is that I miss the good old white boys that I grew up with. I didn't grow up with any white people, what I'm saying. I grew up watching them on TV, like, the Tony Hawk skater types, who occasionally listen to rap, but they also listen to rock music too. They had their own style, their own subculture that I could dabble in. I get to watch their music videos. Like, man, I don't understand Linkin Park, but I like the melody or something, Now it's the white boys rapping. Preppy white boys rapping at that. I'm like, I don't know, man. But it's just true that black people have been considered cool in in America for a really long time. And I think one of the elements of this, as I talked about this previously on the channel as well, MTV, they did a documentary. I forget what it was called. I actually loved it so much I downloaded it on DVD back when you could do that. You burn things on DVDs. But it was something like The Elements of Cool or something like that, where it was a documentary about MTV. And it was how does MTV stay tapped into youth culture. And they showed that MTV had basically these cultural investigations. They would send out young people to discuss music with other young people. So it would be like people in their 20s and mid 20s, because MTV used to have like an age limit. Like if you was 25 and over, you couldn't be a VJ on MTV. Like that was a real thing. So it would be people in their almost mid 20s going to do these investigations into the homes of like teenagers to see what they're listening to see what they're dressing like, all this kind of stuff, so MTV can stay up to date. And that's when they started figuring out that a lot of young people were listening to rap music. And this is when you started seeing like Pepsi commercials start having rappers in it. I think Ludacris was one of the rappers that had a Pepsi deal. And then Nelly had that Sprite deal. Ludacris ended up losing the Pepsi deal due to some shenanigans, right? But you started seeing rappers become the face of national brands. And this was like in the early 2000s. And all of this stuff was occurring around the same time. There was a great cultural shift where it was now official that black people were the coolest people in the country. And whiteness had kind of fell backwards. And it was an unofficial thing. But it's what we started to see. And I saw it even as a youth. I saw a lot of that. So when he starts talking about black people having some sort of cultural control in the country, he's not lying on the element of what's cool. Now, the problem here is the assumption that all black people are cool, which is not true. Okay. Ricochet exists. Oh, I know he's got a white mama. Don't worry about it. He's not cool. He's a dork. And that's actually working for him. He's working his dorkiness into his character. But he talked about the Hurt Business. The Hurt Business are cool. But it is not an age thing. It's an approach. And it was something where black culture is ever evolving. Every generation, slang and all that kind of stuff evolves, period. But black slang was evolving super quick. Like there would be, because there was, all these different parts of the country will all refer to the same thing a little bit differently, So you would have, especially in the 90s where you started having hip hop from all over the country, you would get women be called different things, from shorties to honeys to booze to, all this kind of stuff. And so the culture was constantly shifting. You were loan words going from the South to the North to the Midwest and back and forth. And people were like, oh shit, you kind of picked up on the way that you spoke in your region, but you will also like pick up loan words from over there, from New York, or loan words from LA or something like that. And that rapid change of language, the rapid change of dress, because they dress differently everywhere too. So as those cultures became to, mix together in the 90s, it kind of overwhelmed the, hate to put it this way, but sort of the generic garage band white boy who wore oversized pants and an oversized shirt, maybe had like a bunch of weird tattoos and a bunch of nose rings and stuff like this. He was overwhelmed with because to me, almost all rock bands look the same. But rappers look vastly different. You could always tell a rapper from New York from a rapper from the South, from a rapper from the West Coast, because they all dress different. They all spoke different, And that rapid change, which you started to see in the 90s when it comes to the music, it didn't quite translate to TV and it didn't quite translate to movies, but it was certainly there when rap started becoming the number one music genre. It started becoming really, really black. And now black people are everywhere. Like when Eve and was it Gwen Stefani did that Blow Your Mind song. I think that was in like the early 2000s, and that ended up being huge, you know. And you started seeing rappers, like you saw rappers do crossovers in the 80s, you know, but that stuff became far more prevalent in the 2000s. You saw, I think, was it Jay-Z and Linkin Park did that sort of crossover album or whatever. So you started seeing people really get into that stuff. And this is why when people started saying like, hey, we almost had this race thing figured out in the early 2000s. We almost had this stuff figured out and it completely reversed with Obama. This is what they mean. You used to be able to go back, and I lived through this stuff. You used to be able to go back and you can see all the white people who were supporting classic hip hop. You're talking about X-Clan and Public Enemy and the Wu-Tang Clan. The majority of all rap fans are white anyway. But then you also saw, you know, a lot of black people tapping into some of the rock. They're not going too far into it, but some of it. They're accepting, you know, that there's rap and rock bands. You know, all this cultural appropriation bullshit, that shit did not exist. There was some people who were mad that Eminem was rapping, but they weren't the majority of people in the country now. Now that stuff would be the majority. People would be mad at Mac Miller and stuff like this. But you started seeing that cultural shift. That's my point. There was a breakaway element where blacks became the coolest people on the fucking earth. And that actually happened in the 60s. Now, we could actually go into a little bit deeper when it comes to that sort of thing in terms of a lot of white leftists kind of really worshipped blacks. And we're not going to go into that because it's not really relevant. But it just furthers my argument that black people are indeed the standard of what's cool in America. And if the black people are not with it, white people typically are not really with it. And that's kind of how things have sort of followed for a long time. And it really helped with somebody like Barack Obama, who all the black people, all the rappers and everybody pretty much got behind him, made him cool. He was the coolest president of all time, even if he wasn't the smartest or the best, because all the black people were behind him. And therefore all the white people who wanted to be cool and didn't want to be racist or whatever, you know, because they had white friends from growing up and all this kind of stuff, they jumped on the bandwagon. Now, how that translates to wrestling is part of that was wrestling did not jump on that, you know, because I said this has been going on for a while and they never really capitalized on it. It's like black people were, you know, the standards of cool in the United States, but Bruno Sammartino was still the top guy in New York. And there were once the Junkyard Dog became a big star in the late 70s, early 80s in New Orleans, that was a big deal. But New Orleans is a black city. And in the South, it was a completely different cultural makeup. Now, there was millions and millions and millions of black people in New York, but there were more ethnic Italians, more ethnic like Puerto Ricans and stuff. They got their heroes with, you know, Bruno and Pedro Morales. It would have been nice if, and Bobo Brazil was in and out, and Big Cat Ernie Ladd was in and out during that time, but there was no black staple in the New York territory, which of course became the WWF, now known as the WWE. And it was like that for a long time. And they were always behind. And it wasn't until The Rock happened, and again, that was in 98, 97, 98, where it finally felt like, okay, black people are cool. I mean, we've dominated boxing. We've dominated the NBA. At this point, and by dominated, I mean culturally. I don't mean that the best boxers are black or that the best basketball players are black. I'm just saying culturally these leagues began to change. You know, like all boxing became whatever Muhammad Ali had done. Right? You know, the fast rap shit talking heel boxer, you know, that is what boxing became. It became like George Foreman and Smoking Joe Frazier and, you know, Mike Tyson in the 80s and, you know, Hagler and, you know, all this. And that actually became a thing with Joe Louis, but Jack Johnson actually, but we can put that to the side. And then the NBA became a pretty much all black league. And then you had Michael Jordan. And you had the bad boy Pistons, what is Isaiah Thomas, and you had Magic Johnson. And then you had Larry Bird. You know, Larry Bird was there. He was there the whole time, but it was pretty much established that all the best basketball players were black. And then there was one Larry Bird. You know, it didn't really cross over into the NFL because the quarterbacks were still white. But you had a lot of the linebackers, like Reggie White, and a lot of the running backs like Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders were black. You had Jerry Rice, he was black. Terrell Owens. And then later on, you had Randy Moss. And like almost, it seemed like all the best athletes were black. And it felt like all the best musicians were black. But it didn't cross over into Hollywood, not really. It was just Denzel Washington, and that was pretty much it when on the black front. And then in wrestling, it was just The Rock. And these were guys who were, with the exception of, I guess you could say, Malcolm X, a lot of people saw Denzel Washington as race neutral for the most part. Even though he had did all these movies with Spike Lee and stuff like that, he was being known as being a great actor. He wasn't known as being a great black actor. So they saw him and Will Smith, who was one of the more popular television personalities. They saw these guys as race neutral, which means that you could, if you were white, you could see yourself in Will Smith, or you could see yourself in Denzel Washington without the blackness being thrown back in your face again and again. In The Rock, for a lot of people, was the same way. They didn't really emphasize The Rock's race. It was not that much discussion about the Rock being black. You know, he was sort of a race neutral. And that's when you started seeing a lot of the colorism. The people would say, oh yeah, The Rock, you know, he's mixed. Because now you have to denigrate The Rock in order to raise up somebody else. But it didn't catch on. You know, like wrestling has always been behind on what's cool. Because the promoters had no fucking idea what's cool. Again, Vince McMahon was in his 50s in the 90s. You know? He didn't know what was cool. He had never even seen Scarface. It took for Scott Hall to tell him about Scarface for him to even know about it. You know, so he was always behind. And he was always playing to the kids, but he didn't know what the kids liked. You know, he managed to stumble into something with Stone Cold Steve Austin where he had his own little Charles Bronson, you know, like he had his own John McClane, you know, his own action hero, his own, you know, Sylvester Stallone. And that worked. And that was a huge success because black people liked Rambo and, you know, and all that kind of these action movies too. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was kind of that guy. But The Rock was more of a cultural hero for black people because he spoke how black people spoke, even though it was kind of like a rip on Muhammad Ali. But it felt natural. It felt like that's who we all, as dudes in the hood, that's how we spoke. Or that's how we wanted to speak. And he came across like a rapper a little bit without rapping, you know. And so that was the only time when you really had wrestling as something that was cool. And it was something that was black forward. But it was still a very, 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 unfortunately, you say white product. Because, you know, it was all rock music, almost all rock music all the time. And there was not a lot of black wrestlers. There was The Rock, then there was Mark Henry, D'Lo Brown. Was there another one? Of course, Ron Simmons was there. Booker T, he came in. So, but there weren't a lot. It was probably like 5 or 6 on a roster of like 100, right? So they were always behind on, musically. They was always behind when it comes to image. When they finally started to catch up is actually these days. Because now there are more black wrestlers on the roster than ever. Rap music is the number one musical genre in the world. And that's why all the theme songs and shit are rap music now. NXT now is dominated by black men at the top. And this is what, Alfred Konuwa is going to get to. And it took us a long time to get here because I had to ramble, but we got to play the rest of this video now.
Black people on TV, the cooler the product, the higher the ratings. Life's not fair, I don't make the rules. People love to weaponize DEI against black people. You know how low NXT's ratings would be if there was a white DEI program? Like if there was a DE white program, it would literally be AEW, but worse. You know how I know? It's because there was a white NXT on Wednesday nights. And after getting every opportunity to fail against Dynamite, black people stepped in and bailed them out with African NXT on Tuesdays.
All right. Let's discuss this because I hated the black and gold product. Absolutely hated it. Could not stand it. Hated it so much. Had nothing to do with the white people though. And this is where I have a strong diversion from what he's talking about. That stuff was trash because of the people that they picked to put on the show. All right. The show was populated with 5'8", milky white, basically guys who were good in-ring performers, not much in the way of personality. And then the storylines were bland. So you had a lot of nothing happening. And I said this before, I'll say it again. There is the fickleness of the indie crowd where they would try to meme things into success. They're trying to do that right now with Gabriel Kidd and over in New Japan. They're trying to meme him into success. Basically, you keep talking about it, you keep talking about it, you keep talking about it, keep talking about it, keep talking about it, and hopefully you could talk it into existence, and his stardom. But that was the same thing about Black and Gold NXT. People try to talk it into greatness instead of just letting it be great and then, enjoying it. They tried to talk it into existence. Every match was great. Every show was the best. And you go back and you watch that stuff and some of it was really good. Sure. And then you stumble across a Johnny Gargano, Adam Cole match that got 5 stars or some dumb shit like that. And it's one of the worst things you've ever seen. And it's quite honestly one of the things that killed the brand. Because once Dynamite came along and it was considered the quote unquote cooler product, even though no black people are at the top of the card, it was considered a cooler, fresher product. It nuked NXT from the rafters. And a lot of it was the same boring white dudes who were on the show before. But it had nothing to do with them being white. It had everything to do with really boring creative. The fact that these guys had been around forever. Guys like Finn Balor and Adam Cole. They've been there forever. Bringing over guys from Europe that don't show much personality. Guys like Pete Dunne. Some of these dudes are older. They don't connect, or they connect, or as I put it on Twitter, a lot of people have an emotional connection to these guys that they watched tapes of when they were in their youth. So they are emotionally attached to Bryan Danielson and CM Punk and Ricochet and all these guys because they watched them come from the independents to the WWE. But the people who don't know about the independents, they don't care about that shit. You have to get over in front of them. And a lot of those people failed to do so. They get to the main roster or they get that main platform and the average Joe is looking like, what the fuck is this? I'm not invested in this. I don't care about this. This guy's not cool. Now, Undisputed Era was kind of cool for a while. And then they ran it into the ground. It wasn't cool anymore. Then they broke them up. And it wasn't cool anymore, But I get it. I get what he's saying, But I diverge because I don't think it's a a black and white thing, or why NXT failed, or why AEW is failing. I think that it has a lot more to do with very, very bad creative and very, very, very bad ideas of who they should be pushing. Do I want to see more black talent get opportunities? Absolutely. Do I even agree that black people are the standard of what's cool in the United States? I absolutely agree with that too. But the idea that if you put white people on top, all of a sudden the product isn't cool anymore, it's like, no, not really. There's nothing preventing white people from being cool. Again, white people have been cool for a long time. You know, a lot of black people actually enjoy, you know, certain movies. Look at when we talk about these rappers, like I talked about a few minutes ago. How many of these rappers name themselves as like mob bosses? And I didn't even get it when I was a kid, you know, but almost every rapper has some kind of mob boss alias, you know, like Giancana or Escobar, even though that's not the Italian Sicilian mob. There's rappers named Capone. You know, they're named each other after drug dealers and all this kind of stuff, right? They're borrowing from the other cultures and using it to bolster themselves. But that goes along to what I said about black people basically just being, you know, borrowing from other cultures and different areas. But that doesn't prevent white people from being cool. Nothing prevents white people from being cool. It's just that there are no cool white people on top right now. You know, there might be some solid, you know, guy like Cody's not a bad guy, but I wouldn't say that Cody is cool. You know, he's a nice guy. He's fine. You know, I think Jon Moxley was cooler a couple of years ago. He had a more of a cool streak to him. I likened him a lot to John McClane in Die Hard. You know, the kind of unconventional hero type, but now he's run himself into the ground, and the Death Riders are absolutely terrible. But then you also have the age thing, where sometimes when a guy comes out there with all that gray hair and saggy eyes, like, you know, Edge and CM Punk, and you're like, God damn. It's like you will be like the old sensei in the Kung Fu movie at this point. You want to be the star. It's different. It's just different. But that's the diversion that I have for him. Is I don't think if you can put white people on top and it'll be fine. But if it has to be a cool white person or a cool white woman or a cool white man, they could even be gay if that's what it is. There is no monopoly on cool. There's nothing that prevents other people from being cool. You just have to find cool people. And NXT did a good job. Specifically, you know, Mark Henry, he did a good job of when he was recruiting for WWE. He recruited a lot of people with charisma and personality who just happened to be black. And so that's how you get, you know, Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair, even though Jade Cargill went to AEW first. But then you got Bianca Belair. And, you know, that's the key ingredient, is having charisma, having personality. And a lot of that stuff comes from having interests outside of wrestling, having a life outside of wrestling, or having a fundamental understanding of who you are, where you can be authentic, be yourself, talk how you talk, move how you move, and people are going to want to mimic that and want to be like that. And if they're in a black package, it just works out because you can always play the, you know, sort of the quote unquote black card, right? But there's nothing that prevents white people from being cool. There are none. It's literally that simple, you know? Just like being cool is primarily the domain of young people. Young people typically decide what's cool. But the Hurt Business, again, like he said, are in their 50s and they're undeniably cool. You know, there have been plenty of cool 30-year-olds. You know, Shaft was cool. You know, he wasn't a kid. You know, so you can have people who break the mold, but you have to be a better judge of talent. And most of these people are not. Triple H, the first thing he did was he brought in a bunch of the same guys that tanked NXT before. He brought a lot of those guys into the main roster of WWE. They weren't cool or interesting in 2022. They're not cool or interesting now. And then he's doubled and tripled up on them. Typically, there's more of these guys now than there were before. Because, again, Vince cleaned this shit out. He went and purged a lot of the Johnny Garganos and, got rid of these fucking people. And then Triple H comes in, and not only do we got Johnny Gargano back, but now you got the Motor City Machine Guns. Now you got Pete Dunne on the main roster. You got, these people are boring. These people are not cool. These are not people you want to spend time with. They might be nice guys, might be the best guys in the world, but you don't want to spend too much time with them. You don't want to be like them either. So it doesn't work. And then they fucked around and the Samoans got cool. And that's what everybody was like, oh, okay. Bloodline, we want to be like them. We want to dress like them, talk like them. And they're not black. So it's not an element of you have to be black. Right? So that's why I disagree with Alfred Conoway. But I understand where he's coming from.
Wow, pro wrestling really is a microcosm of America. Happy Black History Month. NXT's main event picture feels ready to make a difference on the main roster immediately. They're young, they're black, they're cool, and they're the opposite of AEW's glaring issue of being old, out of touch, and several steps behind with Tony Khan in charge.
All right. That's going to end up being an issue of creative. Is Triple H going to let Trick Williams be Trick Williams on the main roster? Probably not. He's not letting Carmelo Hayes be Carmelo Hayes. So I don't believe that he's going to let Trick Williams be Trick Williams. I don't think he's going to look at Trick Williams and say, well, he's unorthodox in terms of in the ring. He's not up to par yet, but he has tremendous charisma and he can talk. We can work with that. He's not going to do that, because he is. I haven't seen him do it yet. He could do it with the Street Profits, and the Street Profits are infinitely better than Trick Williams in the ring. And he's not even doing that with them. So I don't believe it. That all of a sudden Triple H is going to have an epiphany and all of a sudden he's going to allow people with charisma to main event shows. Like, no, I don't see that in our future when it comes to main roster and, Javon Evans and Trick. I just don't see it. No. So you can have the faith of a mustard seed and Triple H all you want. I don't have it. Shawn Michaels, yes. I don't think it matters to Shawn. I think he just wants to have the best show. But even with that, certain elements that made Trick Williams fun and cool, they stopped doing once he became the champion. Like, he had that really fun segment with Lash Legend. He had a couple of fun segments with Lash Legend that really popped people online. And then all the stuffy shirts, usually Caucasians, got really upset at, the sexuality and the storylines and all that kind of stuff. It's like, bro, you have to get over it. You got to get over it. But they won't. And so it's like a lot of the times the fans are holding back the shows. And pretty much everybody recognizes that by their emotional attachment to bum indie wrestlers. Even the ones that I like. A lot of them are just not cool. They're just indie bums that you've been watching on tapes for 20 years. That is literally that simple. The fact that they're white don't even factor in. But do I think Triple H will let Trick Williams be Trick Williams or Javon Evans? No. Do I think Jada Parker is going to be a huge success on the main roster? If Triple H lets her be herself, is he going to do that? I don't think so. Because she's not the in-ring talent. She's only been in the business for 2 or 3 years. So she's not the in-ring talent that he would probably prefer. I just don't see that happening. So I don't have the faith that he has that the coolness of NXT, the fun of the product, is going to translate to the main roster because it hasn't happened so far. In fact, the main roster has just gotten more and more boring over the last several months. As NXT has gotten fun, the main roster, and it's less fun now than it was before. Again, NXT used to be wild. It's still kind of wild, but it used to be really wild. But now it's It's more fun than Raw and SmackDown, but Raw and SmackDown are absolutely dreadful. And those shows are about as bad as Dynamite. And I can't blame the white people. The white people, I blame the people who are writing the show. Over on WWE, they just happen to be white. But in AEW, I guess the guy is, he's Pakistani? So, but let me know what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe. I'm going to talk to you guys later.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, Daddy.